Hi everyone, welcome back to the last video in the problem solving process. And I like to call this one, the synthesis part, I like to call it the one skill that could change someone's life. Because it's so powerful to communicate in an effective way. It affects everything from professional success to actual work getting done, to personal relationships. It's just so helpful in so many fields and walks of life. So today in this video we're gonna talk about synthesis, and we're gonna wrap up the problem solving process. Planning actions is sort of part of synthesis, because when you synthesize your findings, you automatically, it just becomes mechanical to generate an action plan. You're just generating a laundry list of things that you've already prioritized, analyzed, communicated effectively, etc. So we're going to focus on synthesis, and let's dive right in. So this time we're going to start with an example right away. So I want you to imagine that you're the VP of HR in a company. You run a survey every quarter of around your employees, asking them things like, how overworked are you? Is your manager supportive? Are you satisfied with your job? Just a general talent pool assessment survey. And these are the results. These are the results from your latest survey, perhaps this current quarter. So pause the video, take a quick look at it if you need to, and then let's try to synthesize this. So the CEO asked you, do you think we're ready, people-wise, for the new product launches? You have product launches coming up, and product launches are difficult, and they require a lot of motivation. So the CEO asked you, do you think we're ready? From a people perspective, they will require a lot of enthusiasm from our teams. What would you respond to them saying based on the data you just saw? And pause the video, think about it, perhaps write down the 1 to 3 to 4 sentences that you would tell the CEO in that moment. Okay, let's take a look. To tell them a true synthesis, there's only one of these 4, which is the one in the top left. You want to tell them that something actionable. Hey, we need an improvement program, revising middle management performance, because remember, here, only 19% of your people think that their managers are supportive. So middle management is obviously a problem. So you want to tell the CEO that you need an improvement program, so an action, and why. We ran our employee survey, and the majority of our employees believe that they're overworked and unhappy. And implicitly here, you gave them a data point as well, which is majority of employees think X, Y, Z. So it's a why and a data point. And that's essentially how you synthesize. If you told them our workers are overworked and not happy, which could sound like a logical answer to the question of, do you think we're ready people-wise? Or if you told them the data, just the hard data, our survey results show only 31%. You haven't told them any so what, right? You haven't told them any conclusion. Remember, you're there to give conclusions, to give so what. You're not, just running data. That's different. That's a computer. A computer runs data. You're a person. You're interpreting the data. You're making decisions based on the data. You're making recommendations based on the data to those who make the decisions if you're not the one making the decision. But the trickiest one could be, hey, why is the one in the bottom right, like right here, not a synthesis? Where you say, we need to improve the company morale. We're not in a good place to start the new product launches. So this one gets closer because it gives the CEO the sort of decision point they were looking for, but it does not explain why using any kind of facts, right? You're just saying we're not in a good place. That's a very high-level judgment statement. But when here you mention there's a survey, there's majority believes this and that, then you've given them, next to your assessment of the situation or the so what of the situation, you've given them hard facts to support your argument, right? And that's basically the difference between a synthesis and just a summary. So I want you to say it with me, synthesis is not a summary. I can't stress this one enough because it's such an important skill in interviews, in meetings, in meeting with high-level management, in communicating to large groups, to small groups. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of the whole CEO elevator pitch, which is basically what we've done here, by the way. That is how you do it. And we're gonna structure it and give you like a proper methodology to think about it in a second. But I just want you to hone in that a synthesis is different from a summary. A synthesis has conclusion. What do I do? What are we doing next? And why? While a summary is just a restatement of some facts and maybe you're organizing a few pieces of raw information, right? So make sure that you internalize this very, very well because it's extremely powerful and extremely important and will show up in all interviews you're going to do. It's almost always in the very end. So what would you tell the CEO, or what do you think we should do? Yada, 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 right? When they ask you that, they're basically trying to test your synthesis capability. That's essentially what it is, and it's one of those really important metrics that they evaluate. Okay, so like we said, synthesis is a summary plus insight plus some action. Not 100% of the time you're going to have action in it, but it's always preferable to have action. So it's just pushing the thinking further. If you don't push, you're given a summary. If you're pushing the thinking and implying a so what, or explicitly saying a so what, that is what makes it a synthesis. Okay, let's look at a simple methodology. Some of you might have heard of it, but we're going to go through it in proper detail. The pyramid principle. So the pyramid principle, or the Minto pyramid, is a concept in communication that was developed by McKinsey partner a long time ago. And it's very, very strong, and I think it's used across the board in almost all the top companies in the world. And it relies on 3 levels. A governing thought, that's your so what, essentially. Basically what we said in the previous example. And then some major support lines, and then some minor support or details whenever you want to give them. Some anecdotes, perhaps, etc. The major support lines in most situations are relying on analyses of some organized data. And it doesn't have to be quantitative, sometimes it will be qualitative, but it's just generally how it works. So the pyramid flows in all directions, right? Like, don't think about it here like it's flowing this way only or that way only, like you build these and then you build these and then you build these. No, it's actually flowing in all directions when you think about it. And here's a simple way to think about it. When you're creating a pyramid, one of the best places to start is to remind yourself of what the question is, right? So just remind yourself, let go of your own agenda for a second, and think about the question in like 2-3 seconds. You want to make sure that whatever you communicate can flow downwards here into a dialogue. So when you mention this governing thought, right, the overarching answer to the question, it could, or it's framed in a way that could be unpacked, essentially, if the other person or your audience in general starts asking questions about how, why, what, that governing thought would lead them to ask these questions, right? And then when you think about it upwards, every level here is creating a so what for the level above it, right? So in the simple example we used, we said, employees are not happy and they don't think their managers are supportive. That's a support line to the governing thought of we're not ready for the product launches and we're going to launch an improvement program, right? And you could have had some kind of anecdote, for example, in the third level here, where the VP of HR would have said something like, and I confirmed that with one-on-one interviews with a sample of our employees, and I've heard certain anecdotes that confirm that the survey results are correct, right? Something like that. So that's sort of the overview of what the pyramid of communication is. Now, the ideas in these buckets and in these buckets over here should be in logical order, and they should be at the same level of abstraction or the same level of importance. Remember when we talked about issue trees? This is very, very similar in the way you think about it. So that's sort of the overall view of what pyramid-based communication or the pyramid principle means. I know I've gotten a lot of questions about what that means, just like I got a lot of questions about MECE. So I wanted to dive into that, and let's look even further. So you can think of these synthesis pyramids in two types of reasoning. You're either doing inductive or deductive reasoning. And forget about the jargon, all right? You're going to get this very simply because we all do it all the time anyway. So you have that governing thought or like a conclusion or something like that. You either are going to present 3 arguments or 5 or whatever underneath it. Each of them supports that governing thought independently of the other 3 or 4 or 5. And each one alone is enough to reach that governing thought or conclusion. Or you're going to present arguments that are dependent on each other, but when they are, put together, they lead to that conclusion. Fairly straightforward, right? They're all either independent, but they all arrive at the same conclusion, or they're dependent on each other, but when you put them together, they push that conclusion. And I don't want you to overthink this. This is just for your mental modeling of what's going on, but it will become second nature to you once you've practiced enough. And that's precisely, for example, how we run presentations as well. It's the same exact concepts. Now let's look at a couple of examples just to make it clear. So don't worry, we're going to look at a couple. So let's go back to our friends who were doing the pro bono work at a law firm, if you remember them from previous videos. So let's assume we've arrived at the conclusion that our law firm should do pro bono work. And the senior partner in that firm has a meeting with you saying, okay, what should we do? And you tell them, our law firm should do pro bono work. 1, the financial benefits are roughly equivalent to the real financial costs. So we're good on that financial front. 2, the non-financial benefits in terms of motivating our teams, because their teams like to work on pro bono causes, are sound, they're substantial. And 3, the impact on the communities that we will serve, that are underrepresented, etc., will certainly be positive. So think about it. Each one of those alone could be a reason on its own to do pro bono work, right? And at the same time, they all point towards the same conclusion. Those 2 levels together are the synthesis. One is what, and one is why. Okay? So that's sort of the inductive example. Now let's take another example around the one we call deductive, this one right here. Okay? You could go back to our friends at GM. Let's make a quick assumption. Let's assume you've done all your analyses and planning, and we finished the issue trees in the last video or the one before, and you've run the numbers, and it turned out that the market is actually really going in the direction of electric vehicles, EVs. So your conclusion is to avail an existential threat, we need to acquire an EV company within the next 2 years, right? And then the arguments, and don't let the situation, complication, resolution thing confuse you. I'll get to that in a second. Basically, your arguments are saying, our analysis says, in order to survive, you must have fully electric vehicles in the market in 2 years, okay? Plus, it's impossible to organically build the technology needed in under 2 years. It has to be acquired. Those two together equal to, therefore, acquire an EV manufacturer. And then this becomes the conclusion. To avail a disaster, you need to acquire an EV company in the next 2 years. Now, I know some of you might be confused. Hey, doesn't this look very much like that? It does on the surface of it, right? Because this is the resolution, this is the solution to the problem, and this one's main component is the solution to the problem. But here's how you can think about it. That this one right here is the combination of these things, all right? But you don't have to worry about these technical things. Nobody's going to test you on that. It's just a way for you to conceptualize arguments and how they're made, right? And in this case, you have a situation, okay? And this situation causes a complication because it's impossible to organically build it, right? This situation is neutral. It's just neutral. It says, in order to survive, everyone has to have electric vehicles in the next 2 years, okay? It does not take into account the fact that GM, in this hypothetical case that we're creating, does not have the technology. And it's impossible to build it. That is the real complication. So the solution, or what we call the resolution, is to acquire. And why? Here is the entire logical argument up there. Situation, complication, resolution is a very common framework to think about communication, just like the pyramid principle. They often go hand in hand, just like in this example right here. You can think about it as, hey, if I'm communicating something to someone that is a business decision, I want to tell them what the context is, what the problem is based on that context, why is that a problem, and then what the solution is, right? It's very simple, and it's still very powerful. So you can, apply and use it together with the pyramid principle whenever it's useful. So very quickly, just a PS, this is also how we make powerful presentations, right? Like think of these here, the 1 to 7 as slides in the presentation, and these are sections in each slide, right? That's how you build the story of a presentation. You have a governing thought, and then you have these major lines of thought underneath, which are sort of supporting the governing thought, and then which basically translate into sections in a presentation, and then these become pages or slides, and these become data points or particular parts of a slide. Just FYI. Before we close, there's 2 things I want to mention real quick. One, do not worry if this is not natural. It is not natural to 99.9% of us. It takes practice, it takes years to become like very, very fluent in this pyramid structure of communication and to be able to synthesize on the fly really quickly. Just keep practicing. It takes years, and I mean years. There are senior partners in like some of the world's top firms that are still working on it. So don't worry, but at least you have a really good start by understanding these concepts and knowing what to practice. Because one of the major issues is when it's an unknown unknown. I don't know that this is what I should practice. Then I will never get better. But now you know what to practice, right? And hopefully we're going to practice some more. This is thought number 1. The last thing Here's a quick trick. When you're synthesizing something, run it through these filters in your mind. In an interview or in a meeting or when you're writing a document, actually, it's the same thing. Is it targeted to my audience? Like, do they care? Am I telling my audience what they need to know, right? So that's the T. And then, is it overarching of the entire story? As in, can this sentence or slide or entire presentation or whatever be unpacked to deduct the rest of the story from it if I explain it, right? Can we have a conversation around it, or is it not covering everything? Is it the conclusion of everything, the distillation of everything, or not? And then 3, is it a powerful message that compels action, right? And remember, we're not talking here in academic environments, we're talking in business environments. So everything we do is to generate effective decisions that will take a business into a better place. So you want your communication to have a powerful message that compels action. And then finally, is it supportable by data and facts and analyses? Can I support everything that is in it? Again, it will take time to be able to do this in your head really quickly. It becomes second nature, trust me, it will. But at least, again, you have some filters, you can run it quickly and correct if you didn't do it right in the first place. I suggest that when you're doing some practice cases or stuff like that, or perhaps when you're preparing a presentation at work or writing a document that certain groups are going to take a look at to make a business decision, the beginning of that document or the beginning of that conclusion of a case that you're given an interviewer, you quickly run through these 4 things. And if it's a yes on most of them, then you're probably giving a good synthesis most of the time. So yeah, that was synthesis, and I hope that was useful. Please feel free to reach out to me with any questions.